Hey, amazing people. If you're subscribed, then you're a legend. Thank you so much. But most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please smash that sub button and join the family. We're almost at 30,000 subs, so let's make that happen. It's free and really means a lot to us. Thank you so much. Don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoy these stories.
I'll be honest, when I first matched with Anne on Tinder, I wasn't expecting much. She had a cute profile, but honestly, I didn't think it was anything out of the ordinary. She seemed sweet though, and her pictures were pretty cute. We started chatting, and the conversation was easy. We had a lot of the same interests: movies, food, music, just the usual stuff. After a couple of days, I felt like we were kind of hitting it off. She was funny, always making me laugh, and I liked that she seemed genuine. She wasn't just throwing out those one-liners that people use to keep the conversation going but don't really mean. She asked about my life, my job, and shared bits about hers. One night, after a few rounds of texting back and forth, she dropped something that caught me off guard. She told me she had a secret. Now, by this point, I wasn't freaking out or anything. It wasn't like we were super deep into our conversations, but I figured if it was important, she'd tell me soon enough. I asked her what the secret was, but she just laughed it off and said it wasn't the right time to share yet. She seemed serious about it, so I gave her the space to tell me when she was ready. To be honest, I didn't think much of it. People have secrets, right? And some things just take time to reveal. Days went by, and we kept texting, and everything seemed normal. She was still funny, still nice, and I still had no clue what this secret could be. I started to forget about it, to be honest. It wasn't that big of a deal. By the time we met in person, I felt comfortable. Our first date was casual, coffee at a small shop downtown. Nothing crazy. We clicked. I enjoyed her company. She was the same person she was in the texts, witty, easy to talk to, and overall just chill. As the date went on, I started thinking that maybe this was the one. There was something about her that felt different, like we just meshed well. She looked like she'd been having a good time, and I felt I was in a good place too. We had a few more dates after that, and I began to like her more each time. But then came the fifth date. At this point, we were comfortable enough to meet up for dinner at a nice Italian place. We had been texting like crazy, and everything felt like it was heading in a positive direction. She had been a little quieter than usual that week, but I didn't think much of it. People get busy, right? When I walked into the restaurant and saw her sitting at the table, she looked beautiful as usual, and for a second I forgot about the weird vibe she had been giving off recently. She was smiling, and we went through the usual pleasantries, ordering food, chatting about our day, all that normal stuff. Then after a while, she started looking at me differently. She seemed a little more serious than I had ever seen her before. I could tell she was thinking about something, and I could feel the tension in the air. It was one of those moments when you know something's about to change, but you can't tell how. She paused for a second, pushed her food around on her plate, and then finally spoke up. She told me she was ready to tell me her secret. I braced myself for whatever was coming. I'd been wondering about it for weeks, and even though I had no idea what it was, I tried to stay open-minded. I thought maybe it's something personal, like she's going through something difficult. I didn't want to judge her without knowing the full story. She leaned in and said she had something to admit. My heart was racing, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. She told me she was transgender. Oh boy. It took me a second to process it. I was a little stunned. I wasn't expecting that. She explained it all: how she had transitioned years ago, how she had worked through a lot to get to where she was now, and how she was proud of who she had become. I could see how much it meant to her to tell me, and I could tell that she was nervous about my reaction. But honestly, I didn't know how to feel. I sat there for a minute staring at my plate, trying to figure out how to respond. This wasn't a situation I had ever been in before. I had no problem with the fact that she was transgender, but it wasn't something I had ever expected to deal with. I hadn't even thought about it up until that point. I could tell she was just waiting for me to say something, and the silence in the room felt heavy. I looked at her and said the first thing that came to my mind, something I wish I hadn't said. I told her that it didn't matter to me, but I was honestly a little shocked. And that's when things got weird. She looked at me, her face changing from nervousness to something else, something I couldn't quite place. For a moment, she didn't say anything, but I could tell she was processing my reaction. She started talking about how people in the past had been uncomfortable with her being transgender and how they treated her differently when they found out. I thought I understood where she was coming from, but the more she spoke, the more I started feeling like I had just stepped into a situation I wasn't prepared for. I felt bad for her, and I still liked her, but I wasn't sure if I was ready for the complexity of it all. As the night went on, I found myself getting more and more distant. Not because I didn't care about her, because I did, but because I started realizing that there were things about her life that I wasn't equipped to deal with. It wasn't about her being transgender. It was about everything surrounding it. There were so many layers, so much baggage, and I didn't know if I could be the person who could handle it. I ended the night early telling her I was tired, and we both went our separate ways. On the way home, I couldn't stop thinking about everything she had said. It wasn't that I didn't respect her for who she was, it was just a lot to process, and I didn't know how to handle it. We texted a few more times after that, but things fell off. I could tell she was waiting for me to come around, to accept her for everything she was. But in my heart, I knew I wasn't the right guy for her. I wasn't ready to handle the complexities of her past and all the potential judgment and misunderstanding that came with it. I ended things after a few more awkward conversations. I think about Anne sometimes. She's a great person, and she deserves someone who can fully accept her. But I guess it wasn't meant to be. It's one of those stories where I learned a lot about myself, about how far I'm willing to go for someone, and how I sometimes just don't have the emotional capacity to deal with things I don't fully understand. Maybe that's a lesson I had to learn the hard way. I'm not gonna lie. I was pretty excited when I matched with Hassan on Tinder. His pictures looked cool. He was wearing trendy clothes, had this smile that seemed like he was always in a good mood, and from his bio, he seemed down to earth. We started talking right away, and honestly, I thought he was one of those guys that could make small talk feel like a conversation with a friend you've known forever. For the first couple of days, everything was pretty normal. We talked about the usual stuff, work, hobbies, what we like to do in our free time. He was funny, easy to talk to, and I was genuinely looking forward to getting to know him better. But then things started to take a weird turn. I didn't see it coming at all, but looking back now, I should have noticed the signs way earlier. It was our third conversation when the topic of brands came up. I guess I should have been more suspicious about it when he asked if I was into brands. At first, I thought he meant food brands or maybe fashion. But whatever it was, I just wasn't interested in the whole brand name culture. I mean, I'm not a materialistic person. If something looks good and it's affordable, I'm all for it. But I'm not one of those people who gets obsessed with the latest expensive trends just to fit in. I told him I wasn't really into brands that much, expecting him to just laugh it off or maybe say something like, "Oh, well, that's cool. Everyone's different." But instead, his response took me completely off guard. He didn't just brush it off. He started laughing. I thought he was kidding at first, but then he got more serious, and that's when the tone of the conversation changed. He started telling me that if I wasn't into brands, then I clearly wasn't good enough for him. Like out of nowhere, he just dropped this bomb on me. He said I was too basic and could never keep up with his lifestyle. It honestly caught me off guard. I didn't understand why my opinion on brands was such a deal breaker. It's not like I was judging anyone who liked them, I just wasn't into it. But he made it feel like I had just committed some huge crime. At first, I tried to laugh it off, thinking maybe he was just messing around. But then he doubled down. He went on to say that if I didn't care about luxury brands, then I wasn't aspirational enough for him. He went on about how people who didn't appreciate fine things were just stuck in their little bubble and didn't understand the finer things in life. It felt like he was trying to make me feel small for something that honestly shouldn't even matter. I tried to explain myself, but he wasn't having any of it. He kept saying that if I wasn't into the right things, then I'd never be able to fit into his world. I asked him what that even meant, and he just replied with, "You'll never get it." The more I tried to make sense of it, the more condescending he became. It was like he was looking down on me just because I wasn't obsessed with things that came with a high price tag. What made it worse was that he wasn't even rude about it. He was calm, almost like he was doing me a favor by pointing out how I wasn't measuring up. It was like he was trying to teach me some life lesson. I started feeling like I was being lectured by someone who thought he was superior, simply because he wore name brands. Eventually, I told him that I didn't think that was a healthy way to look at things. People can have different opinions on what matters in life, and that doesn't make someone less of a person. He just laughed again, like I was some naive kid who didn't get how the world worked. I told him that I didn't want to keep talking if he was going to judge me for something so shallow, and he replied with, "Yeah, that's what I thought. You just don't have the right mindset." And just like that, he stopped texting me. No goodbye, no attempt to explain himself. He just vanished. And honestly, that was the moment I realized what a huge red flag he was. It wasn't about the brands or the material stuff. It was about how quickly he jumped to judge me for something so trivial. It made me realize that someone who places that much value on external things, on appearances, might not be someone I want to be around. At first, I thought it was just a weird conversation. I mean, I had strange talks on Tinder before, but this one felt different. It felt like a wake-up call. As much as I wanted to blame him for being shallow and materialistic, I started to realize that maybe I had dodged a bullet. This guy wasn't the type of person who was going to accept me for who I was. He was only interested in what I could give him, whether it was material things or the right image. For the next couple of days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, trying to make sense of it. I told a few of my friends about it, and they were all just as shocked as I was. Some of them even went as far as to say I was lucky to find out about his attitude early on. Looking back now, I agree. I dodged a huge bullet. But I have to say, it's kind of crazy how one conversation can change your whole perspective on a person. Assam was just another guy on a dating app, right? But he left me with this uncomfortable feeling, like maybe people can see relationships as some sort of transaction. Like, it's not about who you are, but what you can provide. That's something I never want to deal with. A few weeks later, I found myself matching with someone else, and while I was excited, I couldn't help but be cautious. The thing with Hassan had left a mark, and I realized how important it was to be with someone who saw me for who I am, not just for what I wear or how much money I make. That whole experience really made me rethink what I value in people and what I'm willing to tolerate. Hassan didn't just teach me something about brands. He taught me that some people are more interested in appearances than anything else, and that's a red flag I'm not willing to ignore again. I met Priya on Tinder. Her profile was pretty typical, nothing too flashy, but she seemed cool, funny, into food, and had this laid-back vibe that I liked. We got talking, and pretty quickly, I found myself looking forward to every conversation. Her messages were always light and engaging, and she had a way of making me feel like we were already friends. We decided to meet up after a couple of days of chatting, and I was honestly pretty stoked. Our first date went well. We grabbed coffee at a small cafe in the city, talked for hours about everything from work to childhood memories. She was easy to talk to, and I felt like we clicked. We made plans for a second date, and honestly, I was excited to see her again. Little did I know that second date would turn into a nightmare. She mentioned that her parents would be in town, and casually suggested that I meet them. At first, I thought it was a bit soon, but she reassured me that it would be casual, just a family dinner at her place. I figured, why not, and agreed, hoping it would be a good way to see more of her life and maybe get to know her better. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. It was just a dinner, right? So the day came and I showed up at her place. It wasn't what I was expecting. Her apartment was modest, nothing fancy, but there was something about it that felt very homey. I rang the doorbell, and Priya opened the door with a huge smile, looking just as stunning as she had on our first date. She greeted me with a hug and invited me inside. The whole place smelled like spices, which made me a little hungry. Priya led me to the dining room where her parents were sitting at the table. And that's when things got weird. Her parents were sitting there, both staring at me as I walked in, like they were waiting for me to do some kind of performance. Priya's dad didn't even smile. He just gave me a short nod, while her mom had this really intense stare, like she was analyzing every move I made. Priya sat next to me and started introducing me, but I could tell something was off. I wasn't expecting to be grilled on the second date, but that's exactly what happened. They didn't waste any time. Her dad, who seemed a little older than I expected, immediately started asking me about my job, my family, my background, where I grew up, and how much money I made. At first, I thought it was just small talk, but it felt way more intense than that. Priya's mom was sitting there, watching me with this cold, judgmental look in her eyes. It felt like she was silently assessing whether I was worthy enough to be in her daughter's life. The questions kept coming. I was starting to get uncomfortable. They weren't just asking typical getting to know you questions. They were questioning my every decision in life. Priya's dad asked how much I made at my job, what my goals were for the next 5 years, and whether I was planning to settle down anytime soon. It felt like I was on trial, not just on a casual date. I tried to keep it cool and answer as best as I could, but honestly, I felt like I was being tested in ways I wasn't ready for. Priya didn't jump in to help me out at all. She just sat there, watching as her parents went to work on me. At one point, her mom asked if I had ever been in a serious relationship before, and when I said yes, she asked why it ended. I mean, I didn't really feel like I owed them that answer, but I gave them a vague response, just trying to move the conversation along. That's when things got really weird. Her dad, with this completely serious look on his face, told me, "You have to prove yourself, you know. Priya deserves someone who can give her the life she wants. She's a smart girl, and she won't settle for less." I didn't know what to say. I was just sitting there in complete shock, trying to process how they were speaking to me like this. I mean, I get it. Parents are protective of their kids, but this felt excessive. It was like they were deciding whether or not I was good enough to date their daughter, and I had to earn their approval just to be in the picture. Priya didn't say much during the entire ordeal, just occasionally nodding as if agreeing with everything they said. She looked at me like she was nervous for me, but didn't intervene. That's what really threw me off. I couldn't tell if she agreed with how they were treating me or if she was just too scared to speak up. The whole situation felt like I was stuck between her family's expectations and trying to make a good impression. The questions got more intense as the night went on. Her dad asked me what I was planning to do if Priya didn't like my answers. Would I be willing to fight for her? How far would I go to prove my loyalty? Her mom was quieter, but still very much watching me, waiting for me to slip up. I started to feel like I was in some kind of twisted game. It wasn't just dinner. It was like they were evaluating my every move to determine if I was worth Priya's time. They went on, questioning my values, my morals, and my future plans. It was the most uncomfortable I'd ever felt, and all I wanted to do was get out of there. Finally, after what felt like hours of this interrogation, Priya's mom smiled, finally, and said, "We're just making sure you're serious about our daughter. She's not someone who's easily impressed." I didn't know how to react. I was relieved, sure, but also totally drained. I had just spent an evening being scrutinized by people I barely knew, and I still wasn't sure if I had passed the test. Priya walked me to the door after dinner, and I didn't know what to say. She seemed a little awkward, too, not really making eye contact. We said our goodbyes, and I left her place with a million thoughts racing in my head. Looking back, I don't know what was worse, the fact that Priya's parents thought they could put me through some bizarre interview process, or that she didn't stick up for me at any point. It felt like a massive red flag. I thought I could maybe overlook it, but I just couldn't. The whole thing was off. After that night, I never texted her again. Something about her family's attitude just didn't sit right with me, and I wasn't about to be some guy who would prove himself worthy of their approval. It's been a while now, and honestly, I'm glad I didn't stick around to figure out where that relationship could have gone. Sometimes parents' expectations aren't something you can just ignore, and Priya's, they were way too much for me. I'm usually not one to talk about my weird dating stories, but this one, I can't keep it to myself. It's one of those things that has stuck with me, and I still can't figure out if it was just an insane coincidence or something that should have had red flags flashing the entire time. But looking back now, I can't believe I even went on a second date with this guy. So I met James on Tinder. He looked pretty normal in his pictures. Tall, well-dressed, smiling like a guy you'd expect to see walking around the city with his friends or at a coffee shop. His bio wasn't anything out of the ordinary either, just the usual stuff. Love hiking, photography, and trying new foods. Typical. We hit it off pretty quickly in the DMs. He was charming, funny, and pretty easy to talk to. He didn't come on too strong, which I liked. I had a few other dates with guys who were kind of over the top. So when James started messaging, it felt like a breath of fresh air. We talked for a couple of weeks before setting up a date at this little restaurant downtown. It wasn't fancy or anything, just a chill spot with good food. When I walked in, he was already sitting at a table. He had this calm energy about him. He smiled when he saw me, and we greeted each other, no awkwardness. I thought this was off to a good start. We talked about the usual stuff, our jobs, what we like to do in our free time, and honestly, everything seemed fine. He was funny, engaging, and we had some good laughs. But there was this one moment that made me feel a little off. It wasn't something huge at first, just a slight weirdness that I brushed aside. James was talking about his health, how he was really into biohacking, and how he liked to pay close attention to every little detail about his body. At first, I thought it was cool. Everyone has their little quirks, right? But then he started talking about his urine collection. I didn't quite catch it at first, so I thought maybe I misunderstood him. I mean, who would say something that bizarre out loud? But nope, I heard him right. He told me that he collected a drop of his urine every single day and stored it in a little container. He said it was so he could track his health over time. He had this entire system or he could look at the changes in his urine and use it to monitor everything from hydration to stress levels. He claimed that over time, he had been able to figure out a lot about his body just by keeping track of this stuff. I could feel my stomach tighten, but I tried to play it cool. I didn't want to sound rude, but I couldn't stop the cringe building up. Now, don't get me wrong. I get it. People have weird hobbies, but this was next level weird. I mean, collecting your pee every day and then storing it for what? It didn't make sense to me, but I tried to roll with it. Maybe it was just one of those eccentric things. We finished the date and went home, a little freaked out but trying to put it out of my mind. I told my friends about it, and we all had a good laugh about how strange it sounded. But I still couldn't shake the image of him telling me all that stuff with a straight face. A few days later, James reached out to ask if I wanted to go out again. I thought, okay, maybe it wasn't that bad, and agreed to a second date. What happened next is what I can't seem to shake. We met up again, this time at a bar. I walked in, and James was already there, looking as calm and collected as ever. He was holding a small leather-bound book in his hands, and my first thought was, maybe it's his journal or something. I wasn't really sure what to expect. I sat down, ordered a drink, and we started chatting. But then he opened the book. At first, I didn't really think much of it. He started talking about how he'd been keeping track of his health, and he wanted to show me the progress he'd made. And that's when he opened it. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't what I saw. Inside the book, there were little glass vials. Each one had a small drop of yellow liquid in it. My stomach dropped. I couldn't look away. It was exactly what he had described. The little drops of urine he had been collecting every day. Each vial was labeled with a date and a tiny note. Some vials had even more than one drop of liquid in them. I couldn't process it. I don't even remember what he said while I was staring at it, but I felt this sick, cold feeling in my chest. I wanted to leave. But he was still talking about it like it was normal. Like this was a perfectly acceptable thing to be showing someone a second date. He said he was proud of it, how much he'd learned about himself, and how he could look at the vials and see patterns in his health that no doctor could ever pinpoint. I just nodded, trying not to make a face. I didn't want to be rude, but at the same time, I was starting to feel trapped. I wanted to run. Eventually, he put the book back into his bag, and I don't even know how I managed to keep the conversation going after that. We finished our drinks and was already mentally saying goodbye to this date. I walked him out of the bar, my mind racing. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't sure if I should be polite or just be straight up with him. By the time I got in my car, I was already texting my friends about what had just happened. They couldn't believe it either. One of them asked, "Is this guy for real?" And I still couldn't answer, because the whole thing felt like a bad joke. But here's the thing, what creeps me out the most is that I almost gave it another shot. I almost convinced myself that I was overreacting, that maybe I was just being too judgmental. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just weird, it was wrong. So I never reached out again. I blocked him on Tinder, on Instagram, and anywhere else I could. I'll never forget the way he looked when he showed me that book, how serious he was about it, like it was totally normal. I still wonder what kind of person would think that was okay to show someone. Now, whenever I meet someone new, I remember James and his little collection of urine. It's a reminder that sometimes people's quirks are way beyond what you'd expect, and not in a good way. This all started like any normal Tinder story, right? I was just casually swiping, scrolling through the endless faces, hoping to maybe find someone chill for once. It's a hit or miss, honestly. Sometimes you match with someone who seems cool, then their messages are totally off the wall, and you can't even get through one convo without the weirdness creeping in. But every now and then you get lucky. That's what I thought this was gonna be. Her name was Jenny, and she had this vibe about her that was different. Not in an I like weird hobbies way, but more in a I'm probably not the kind of girl you're used to way. I thought it was a cool vibe at first. Her profile picture. I'll admit it wasn't what you call typical. She was lounging on a beach wearing what looked like a bikini top and shorts. No big deal, right? People post all kinds of beach pics. I didn't think much of it until I saw her next one. She was sitting in a car, no shirt, just a thin, see-through cover-up. Okay, now I was starting to get curious. I shot her a message, just something light like, "Hey, what's up?" She responded right away, which was always a good sign. We talked a bit, nothing too deep. She was funny, definitely outgoing, but there was this sense of, I don't know, boldness that came through her words. Like she wasn't trying to impress anyone, but she also wasn't afraid to speak her mind. We chatted for a couple of days, and she suggested grabbing dinner. I thought, sure, why not? Now, I'm not some super cautious dude who overthinks everything, but when it came time to meet, I started to get a bit of that gut feeling. But I pushed it aside. Maybe she was just confident in her style. So the day of the dinner comes, and we meet at this local restaurant. It's not a fancy place, more a laid-back, casual joint, but it's pretty nice. I'm waiting outside by the entrance, looking around for her. Honestly, I didn't expect her to look exactly like her photos because let's be real, who does? But when I saw her walking toward me, I froze. I didn't know what to think. She was dressed, I don't know, it's hard to put into words. She was wearing basically what looked like a bikini and a thin cover-up, like she had just come from a pool party and forgot she was supposed to meet someone for dinner. I'm talking full-on bikini top, the kind you wear on a beach, and barely their shorts. There wasn't much else to her outfit, just this flowy thing that barely covered her. She looked out of place for this restaurant, and honestly, it was awkward. Like she didn't even try to dress for the occasion. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe she was just confident or didn't care. People do that sometimes, right? Maybe I was being too uptight. But when she got close enough and smiled at me, I couldn't ignore it anymore. She had this look like she knew exactly how out of place she looked, but didn't care one bit. I greeted her, trying to act casual, but inside I felt, I don't know, uncomfortable. We went inside, and the hostess just looked at her for a second, then glanced at me like, is this really happening? I could tell it was about to be one of those nights. The staff were all trying to be polite, but I could see the confusion in their eyes as we got seated. We ordered some drinks and was trying to make conversation. But it wasn't really flowing. She didn't seem to notice, though. Jenny was having a great time, laughing about random stuff, completely oblivious to the fact that the staff were clearly giving us side-eye. She didn't even seem to notice when a manager came over to our table. The manager, a woman, was polite but firm. She said something like, I'm sorry, but we have a dress code here, and we ask that our guests adhere to it. I could see Jenny's face instantly drop, like someone had just kicked her dog. The manager, still trying to be nice, told her she'd need to either change or leave, or she wouldn't be able to stay. That's when things got real weird. Jenny stood up. I didn't know what she was going to do. I honestly thought she might storm off or something, but she didn't. Instead, she looked the manager dead in the eyes and just started yelling. Like full-on yelling, arms flailing around, drawing attention from every table in place. This is misogyny. I can't believe you're treating me like this because I don't conform to your rules. I'm being oppressed for my body. Now, I was sitting there, frozen, just trying to process what was happening. The entire restaurant was watching us. I thought she'd stop, but she kept going. She started talking about how women should be able to dress however they want and how anyone who judges them is part of the problem. She was shouting at the staff, at the other customers, and she wasn't backing down. Honestly, I didn't know if I should get up and leave or try to de-escalate the situation. But it didn't stop. Eventually, the manager had to get security involved, and that's when things went from uncomfortable to outright crazy. Jenny was screaming, not making any sense. At this point, people were starting to get up from their tables. Some were filming. I was just trying to shrink into my chair and disappear. They eventually escorted her out, but she was still yelling. You're all part of the problem. You're all just conformists. She shouted, and I swear to God, it felt like the whole restaurant was holding its breath. Everyone stared at me like I was the one who had caused this disaster. I didn't even know how to react. I felt embarrassed, like I'd been dragged into her mess, and I had no idea how to make it stop. I wasn't sure if I should apologize to the staff or just leave. So I sat there for a second, finished my drink, and left without saying a word to anyone. I texted Jenny once I got to my car, just to see if she was okay, but I never got a reply. I'm not sure if she blocked me or if she just didn't care. Honestly, I didn't care either. That night was a total train wreck, and I realized that I wasn't sure if I ever wanted to deal with a Tinder date like that again. I'll never forget the day Sam came into my life, or should I say, the day he would leave it. It all started like a typical Tinder match, light conversation, decent first impressions, and the usual awkwardness you get from texting a stranger. I matched with him one afternoon, and we exchanged messages like two people just trying to fill the silence. To be honest, I wasn't expecting much, but I figured it couldn't hurt to talk. Sam seemed alright at first. He was friendly enough, had a decent job, liked going out on weekends. The usual stuff. We chatted about our favorite foods, shows, and the fact that we both loved hiking. After a few days of texting, we decided to meet up. It was nothing special, just drinks at a bar down the street from where I lived. The date itself was fine, nothing remarkable. Sam was decent looking, had a nice smile, but there was something missing. He was a nice guy, don't get me wrong, but there just wasn't that spark I was hoping for. We talked, laughed a little, but something felt off, like we were both forcing the conversation. It wasn't even that he was boring. He wasn't, but there just wasn't any chemistry. After the date, I felt weird about it. I didn't want to hurt his feelings, but I knew I wasn't interested in seeing him again. I texted him the next day, thanking him for a nice time, but I told him I didn't feel a connection. I thought that would be the end of it. You know, the typical "it's not you, it's me" line. I figured he'd take it like most people do, thank you, wish you the best, and move on. But Sam didn't take it that way. For a couple of days, he didn't reply to my message, and I thought I was done with it. I didn't think much of him and I wasn't expecting any drama. Then one afternoon, I was sitting at work when I started getting weird texts from friends. At first, I thought it was spam, but then one of them mentioned something that made my stomach drop. They said they heard a guy at a bar talking about how he hooked up with me and how it wasn't that good. I froze. I immediately knew it had to be Sam. I didn't even know how he could have found out where I worked, but somehow he did. That was when things took a turn for the worse. I tried to shake it off, thinking it was just some dumb misunderstanding, but the next few days were a complete nightmare. Word spread around my workplace. People I barely knew were suddenly making comments about my personal life, and I couldn't figure out how they knew. Sam had started telling people that we'd slept together and that I wasn't anything special. To him, it seemed like a way to get back at me for not giving him another chance, or maybe he was just angry. Either way, it was out of control. At first, I thought it was just a few guys gossiping, but when I started hearing it from people I didn't even talk to, that's when it hit me. Sam had told everyone. He had turned this entire situation into a public spectacle. He made me feel like I was some kind of joke, and the worst part was he had no problem dragging my reputation through the mud. It was bad enough that he had made the whole thing up, but it was worse knowing that people who didn't know me at all now had this distorted image of me. They thought I was just some girl who hooked up with a guy and then tossed him aside. They didn't know me at all, but they all thought they did because of what Sam said. They didn't care about the truth. They cared about the drama, the gossip, and what was juicy. I couldn't believe how quickly the story spread. The whole office was buzzing, and every time I walked into a room, people would stop talking or give me weird looks. Some of them would laugh it off, but I could tell it wasn't a joke to me. Every time I walked past a group of people, I could hear snickers or whispers. I felt like I was being suffocated by something I had no control over. But the worst part, Sam didn't stop. As if it wasn't enough that he told my coworkers, he started reaching out to my friends on social media. He even messaged my brother, telling him the same ridiculous story. At that point, I was livid. This wasn't just some petty gossip anymore. This was him actively trying to ruin my life. I blocked him on everything, Tinder, Instagram, Facebook, even his number. But it didn't matter. His words had already done the damage. People had already made up their minds about me. I wanted to confront him, to ask him why he thought this was okay. But every time I thought about it, my head would start to spin, and I realized that there was no talking to someone like that. Someone who didn't care about your feelings or the truth. He was just trying to hurt me because his ego had been bruised. The worst part of all of this wasn't even what Sam did. It was how no one stood up for me. The people who heard the rumors didn't ask me for my side of the story. They just accepted Sam's version without a second thought. I guess it's easier to believe the person who's loudest and most convincing, even if they're the one spreading lies. I couldn't focus at work. I couldn't go out with friends without feeling like everyone was judging me. I was becoming this person I didn't recognize, someone who was always looking over her shoulder, afraid of what people were saying about me behind my back. I did everything I could to fix things. I spoke to HR at work, but there wasn't much they could do. They couldn't prove anything, and Sam hadn't technically broken any rules. He didn't say anything illegal, just a few inappropriate comments. But to me, it felt like a violation. It felt like he had taken something from me that I couldn't get back. After that, I tried to distance myself from anyone who was close to Sam. I unfollowed people on social media who seemed to buy into his nonsense. It wasn't easy, but I had to do it. I couldn't let myself be part of that drama anymore. I couldn't let him keep hurting me. Eventually, things calmed down, but I'll never forget how that one person, that one match on Tinder, completely shattered my sense of security. Sam had no idea how much he'd hurt me, and honestly, he probably didn't care. But I learned one thing from that mess: you never really know the people you meet online. And sometimes the people you think are harmless end up being the ones who make you question your trust in everyone. I thought I knew what I was doing. You know, the whole Tinder thing. I'd been on a couple of dates before, nothing crazy, but enough to know the ropes. So when I matched with Paul, I didn't expect anything out of the ordinary. He seemed like a nice guy, good looking, had a decent job, and our conversations were easy. We made plans to meet out at this local bar that had great reviews, a pretty chill vibe. It seemed like it would be just another typical Tinder date. Honestly, I almost didn't even go. I had a weird feeling the whole day, but it was probably just nerves. Everyone gets nervous, right? I had my share of awkward dates, and it was always fine in the end. But something about Paul was different. It was like he was trying too hard to be charming. Every message felt like he was working a little too hard to impress me, like he was hiding something. But I didn't want to overthink it. I'd meet him, see how it went, and if it wasn't good, I'd just go home. When I walked into the bar, I spotted him right away. He was already sitting at a table, looking kind of nervous, but still trying to act cool. He stood up when I walked over, gave me a hug, and told me I looked nice. I tried to relax, but the moment I sat down, I felt this weird tension in the air. The conversation was fine at first, but it was like he wasn't really there. He was distracted, always looking around like he was waiting for something. He ordered us drinks, and I went for a gin and tonic, just something simple. Nothing too strong, just to take the edge off. He ordered the same for himself, but he seemed a little off when the drinks came. He wasn't drinking, just kind of playing with the glass, swirling it around. It was strange, but I didn't want to make a big deal about it. Maybe he was just a bit nervous too. But then something happened that I'll never forget. As I sipped my drink, I noticed him doing something with his glass when I wasn't looking. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was just stirring it or adjusting something. But then I realized he was putting something in my drink. A little pack of something he pulled out of his pocket. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze for a second just staring at him. My gut told me something was wrong, but before I could even process what I had seen, I heard someone behind me. It was a woman. She was standing just outside the bar, and she was staring directly at me, looking almost frantic. She wasn't even trying to hide it, just making eye contact like she was trying to warn me without saying anything. I didn't know who she was, but her gaze felt like a lifeline. My instincts kicked in. I glanced at Paul quickly, trying to figure out if he'd noticed the woman too. But no, he was still focused on his drink, not paying attention to anything around us. I made up my mind in that split second. I didn't know what Paul had put in my drink. I knew it couldn't be good. My heart was pounding, and I started to feel lightheaded, not because of the alcohol, but because of the adrenaline. I was about to sit there and find out what he was planning. I quickly excused myself to go to the bathroom, trying to keep my voice steady. As I walked past the woman, she gave me one last look like a silent nod. That look was enough. I didn't even know her, but I trusted her. When I got to the bathroom, I checked my phone. I had a few missed texts from my friend Emma. It wasn't until I opened them that I realized the woman outside the bar wasn't a stranger. Emma had texted me earlier that day, warning me to be careful with Paul. Apparently, he'd been acting strange with some of her friends, and she had a bad feeling about it. That was when the full weight of the situation hit me. Paul wasn't just some guy I met on a whim. He was someone who had been trying to get close to my friends and had been weird about it. I couldn't believe I'd missed all the red flags. I didn't know what to do next. Part of me wanted to just leave, run as fast as I could, but I knew I needed to stay calm. I had to get out of there without him noticing. I wasn't sure what he'd do if he realized I knew. I texted Emma back, telling her everything, asking her what I should do. She texted back almost immediately, telling me to get out of there right now and that she was calling the cops. She wasn't messing around. I couldn't wait. I shoved my phone back in my pocket, took a deep breath, and walked out of the bathroom like nothing was wrong. My heart was racing, and every step felt like I was walking into a trap. When I got back to the table, Paul was still there, looking a little impatient now, like he was wondering where I had gone. But he didn't seem angry. He just looked like he was expecting me to pick up where we left off. I couldn't let that happen. Not after what I had seen. I made an excuse about being tired and needing to go home. I kept it casual, like I hadn't just realized he was trying to drug me. But he didn't question it. He seemed a little disappointed, but he didn't try to stop me. I walked out of that bar faster than I'd ever walked in my life. My mind was spinning, but all I could think was that I had to get somewhere safe. I didn't look back, not even once, because I knew that if I did, I'd see him following me. And I didn't want that. When I got home, I locked the door, double-checked the windows, and sat on my couch trying to calm down. My hands were shaking, and I felt like I was about to collapse from the rush of adrenaline. I kept thinking about how close I had come to being in a situation I couldn't get out of. How one moment, one wrong choice, could have put me in danger. The cops called me later that night. Emma had told them everything, and they were going to check out Paul's background. I didn't hear much after that. I knew he wasn't going to be a problem for me anymore. I'm just thankful for that woman who warned me. Whoever she was, she saved my life. I'll never forget the look in her eyes. It was like she knew exactly what was going on, and she wasn't going to let me fall into something dark. That night was a wake-up call, one that I'll never ignore. You never know who you're really dealing with. I never expected my first Tinder date to turn into something like this. The app is supposed to be a place for meeting new people, right? Maybe you don't hit it off, maybe you do, but at least you're just trying to have a normal interaction, something fun, nothing crazy. I matched with Raya one day, and at first, it seemed pretty normal. Cute girl, seemed chill, we talked a bit about our interests, and it wasn't long before we decided to meet up. We agreed to go to a local bar that had decent food and a nice vibe. It was one of those places where you could actually hear each other talk without shouting over loud music, which I appreciated. I was already nervous. Who isn't on a first date? But I thought I could handle it. She was cute, she seemed sweet, and I figured we'd have a nice time, even if we didn't end up clicking. It wasn't supposed to be anything big, but from the moment we sat down, things started feeling off. It wasn't immediately obvious, but there was this energy about her. Raya was confident, maybe a little too confident. I think that's what threw me off. We started talking about the usual stuff, hobbies, work, music, and she seemed eager, almost too eager, to get closer. Like physically. I didn't think much of it at first, but when she started inching toward me, I could feel myself getting a little uncomfortable. At first, I thought it was just me being paranoid, or maybe I was overthinking things. But no, she kept closing the distance between us, as if she was trying to make something happen. And it wasn't like she was just being friendly. It was obvious. She was flirting hard in a way that was a bit too intense for a first date. Don't get me wrong, I like a confident girl, but this felt like she was trying to push me into something I wasn't ready for. I pulled back slightly, hoping she'd pick up on the vibe. I wasn't really sure what to do. I didn't want to be rude or hurt her feelings, but I also wasn't comfortable with the direction things were going. I wasn't that type of guy who liked to rush into things. I wasn't interested in anything physical on the first date, especially with someone I just met. I tried to change the subject, keep things light and conversational, but it didn't really help. She just kept leaning in closer, touching my arm lightly, and I started feeling trapped. It's like she didn't get the hint. I told her I wasn't comfortable moving that fast, and that I'd rather just take it slow and see where things went. And then she stopped. Just like that, the mood shifted completely. For a second, I thought maybe she understood. Maybe it was just an awkward moment and we could move on. But no, she looked at me for a few seconds, like really looked at me, and then pulled away. The rest of the date was strange. She seemed distant, not in a fun, playful way, but in a cold, almost calculating way. The rest of the conversation felt forced. By the end of the night, I was glad it was over. I paid for the drinks, we exchanged a few polite words, and she left. I didn't think much about it afterward, honestly. I figured it just wasn't meant to be. Maybe she had a different idea of what a first date should be like. It wasn't a great match, but no big deal. But then things took a bizarre turn the next day. I woke up to notifications on my phone, notifications that completely threw me off. I was getting tagged in posts and seeing my name mentioned in online discussions. At first, I didn't understand what was going on, but then I saw the post. Raya had posted something about me online, and it wasn't good. She didn't just say she didn't feel a spark. She didn't just talk about the date as one of those weird vibe situations. No, she went off. She wrote this long post about how I was an insult, claiming I had rejected her advances because I wasn't capable of handling a confident woman. According to her, I was afraid of strong women, and I was one of those guys who talk a big game but can't handle it when a woman actually shows interest. She said that I was too scared to go out with someone like her, and that I was incapable of having a real relationship. And it didn't stop there. She posted screenshots of our conversations, highlighting the part where I said I wasn't ready to move fast, twisting it into something like I was too fragile to handle her. It was all a complete lie, twisted to make me look like I had some deep-seated issues with women. I was stunned. I felt like I was being attacked by someone I'd barely known. I had literally done nothing but try to be polite and respectful. I wasn't sure how to react. Should I defend myself? Should I just leave it and hope people would see through her lies? It was a mess. The worst part, she had a following. I didn't know how many people she had talked to before posting this, but by the time I looked at the comments, it was clear. Some people were sympathetic, saying things like, "I can't believe men like him still exist," or "What's wrong with him? He could have been lucky to be with someone like her." There were even some comments calling me names I'd never imagined being called. I couldn't just sit there and take it. I tried to message her privately, ask her to take the post down, to at least talk about it like adults. But she didn't respond. Instead, she kept posting about it. She even wrote a follow-up post about how she had exposed me for who I really was and how I wasn't good enough for someone like her. The worst part was that I couldn't escape it. Everywhere I went, I felt like people were looking at me like I was some kind of villain. I was humiliated. Eventually, I had to just ignore it. I couldn't keep fighting a battle that wasn't even worth winning. I blocked her on everything and distanced myself from the situation as much as possible. But honestly, I still think about it. I still wonder how one day could go so wrong, how a simple interaction could be twisted so horribly. And I'll never forget how I felt in the aftermath, like I was a villain in my own story, all because I wasn't ready to move as fast as she wanted. I guess you never really know what you're walking into with people you meet online. I never thought a casual Tinder date could turn into something like that. Like you expect to meet someone, maybe grab a coffee or go for a walk. Worst case scenario, you just don't click and you part ways. No harm done. But what happened with Walter? That's a whole different kind of nightmare. I'd matched with Walter one Friday night. His profile was pretty standard, nothing out of the ordinary. He was into gaming, had a few pictures showing off his PC setup, and he seemed pretty chill about it. To be honest, I wasn't expecting much. Just someone to chat with and maybe make plans for something simple like dinner. But within minutes of matching, Walter started texting me about his passion for gaming. He was one of those hardcore gamers who lived and breathed it. I'd never really been into gaming much, but I wasn't completely opposed to it. So I thought, why not? Let's give it a shot. He asked me if I'd ever played a game with him. I was curious, so I said sure, why not? He suggested we hop on his favorite multiplayer game, and I agreed to join him. It seemed innocent enough, just two people playing a game together. So we set up a time to play. He sent me a link to the game, and I downloaded it without thinking much of it. I'd played some video games before, but I wasn't exactly an expert. I wasn't prepared for how intense Walter was about it, though. The first time I logged into the game and got connected with him, he sounded excited, telling me how great it would be to play together. But within minutes, I started noticing something weird. Whenever I made a small mistake in the game, even something minor like missing a shot or messing up a move, Walter's tone completely changed. He started getting impatient and then angry. I thought it was just part of the competitive vibe, so I let slide. But it didn't stop. As we went on, Walter began yelling at me over voice chat. At first, I thought he was just messing around, but it quickly became clear he was genuinely upset. Every time we lost a round or something didn't go right, I could hear his frustration building. He started calling me things like useless and pathetic, making me feel like I was the one messing everything up, even though we were playing together. It was like, all of a sudden, the game was less about fun and more about him taking out all of his anger. And the worst part, I had no idea why he was getting so worked up over something so small. I tried to apologize, tried to reassure him that I was still learning, but that only seemed to make it worse. His voice became louder and more aggressive. At one point, I almost started questioning if he was even being serious. I didn't know if he was playing some role or if he was just legitimately this angry. But As the game progressed and we lost another round, things took a turn that I didn't expect. Walter went silent for a moment. I thought maybe he was cooling off or something, but then he just snapped. He yelled something at me that I didn't quite catch, but before I knew it, I saw the bright glow of his computer screen flash in the corner of my eye, and suddenly, my phone flew across the room, hitting my computer screen with a sickening thud. I stared in shock as the screen cracked. My phone hit the wall, and I could barely process what had just happened. My heart was racing. He had just thrown my phone at my computer, my brand new phone, the one I'd just gotten last month. I wasn't sure what to do. I had never been in a situation like this before. I froze for a second, just staring at the screen, trying to wrap my mind around what had just happened. Walter didn't apologize. He didn't even acknowledge what he had done. He just kept going on about how badly I was playing, about how I was ruining everything, as if the phone incident hadn't just occurred. I sat there in silence, not knowing whether to scream or cry. My hands were shaking, my heart still pounding. I could hear him talking, but all I could think about was how completely out of hand everything had gotten. I tried to turn the game off, but he kept yelling at me to keep playing. I told him I needed a break, but it didn't matter. He insisted on continuing, and it wasn't just the game that was a problem now. The way he was talking to me, the way he was treating me, made me feel like I didn't have control over anything anymore. I wanted to tell him to stop, to tell him I was done, but I didn't know how he would react. Somehow, I managed to disconnect from the game. I wanted to leave the call, but I didn't even know how to do that. I felt trapped, like I was stuck in this situation with someone who was unpredictable and angry for no reason. I was angry too. Angry at myself for getting sucked into this mess. Angry at him for treating me like this, and honestly, just feeling helpless. I wasn't having fun. I wasn't learning. I was being belittled, and all over something that was supposed to be a simple game. I muted my mic and just sat there, waiting for the right moment to leave. But before I could, Walter sent me a message saying he was done with me, and that he didn't need someone like me ruining his game. He didn't even acknowledge the fact that he had literally thrown my phone at me. It was like it didn't matter at all. Eventually, I just logged off. I shut down the game and walked over to the spot where my phone had landed and picked it up. The screen was cracked in a way that made it almost impossible to use. I knew right then I had to block him. I didn't care if he was angry or upset. I wasn't going to let someone treat me like that. Later that night, I blocked him on every platform I could think of. I wasn't sure if he was going to try to reach out again, but I didn't want to give him the chance. I'm still not sure what I was expecting from that date. A little bit of fun, maybe. Something lighthearted. I never expected it to turn into a nightmare like that. I know I trust my gut. If something feels off, it usually is. That date wasn't about gaming. It wasn't about having fun. It was about someone who, behind the screen, showed a side of themselves I could never have imagined. I never messaged Walter again. Honestly, I didn't need to. What happened on that date was enough to make me realize that some people can be a lot worse than you expect. I've always been pretty chill when it comes to meeting people from Tinder. You know, a little nervous, but nothing crazy. I'm not one of those guys who overthinks things or expects some perfect match to walk through the door. But what happened on my date with Louisa? That was a whole other level of crazy. I never could have predicted it. So I matched with Louisa a few days before we decided to meet up. Her profile was one of those that had just enough personality to stand out from the usual crowd. She was cute, had some interesting hobbies, and seemed like she was up for anything. We texted for a while, and everything was pretty normal, chatting about random stuff, sharing funny memes, and making plans for our first date. We agreed to meet at this nice little cafe downtown. Nothing fancy, just a casual spot. I got there a little early, ordered a coffee, and sat down at a table by the window. I checked my phone, scrolling through some messages, and before I knew it, I saw her walking in. Louisa looked exactly like her photos, but there was something a little off. I couldn't put my finger on it. She seemed like she was rushing, but I didn't think much of it at first. She came over, smiled, and sat down. We said hello, and then she pulled out the chair to sit down, and that's when it happened. She must have slipped on the floor or misjudged the chair, because before I even realized what was happening, Louisa lost her balance and hit her head on the edge of the table. It was a loud thud, like way louder than I thought it should have been. At first, I froze. I couldn't even process it. She was on the floor, eyes closed, completely still. For a second, I just stared at her. I thought maybe she was messing around, like maybe it was some weird joke. But then I saw blood starting to pool on the side of her forehead, and everything hit me like a ton of bricks. My heart raced. I had no idea what to do. I think my first thought was, this can't be real, right? A couple of people in the cafe looked over, probably wondering what the hell was going on. I quickly stood up, my legs shaking, and tried to check if she was breathing. I swear to God, I was in complete panic mode. I don't even remember what I was saying to her at this point. Probably just a bunch of gibberish. I kept telling her to wake up, but she didn't move, didn't say anything. It was like time just froze for a moment. I felt totally helpless. A woman sitting at the table next to us jumped up and said she was calling an ambulance. That snapped me out of my panic. I grabbed my phone and started dialing, but I couldn't focus. I kept looking down at Louisa, hoping she'd stir or open her eyes. I was practically in a daze as the dispatcher on the other end of the line started asking me all of these questions. Is she conscious? How much blood is there? Has she hit anything else? I didn't have any of the answers. I just kept repeating, I think she hit her head really hard. At this point, the entire cafe was watching us. People were whispering, and I could hear one of them saying something like, shouldn't someone be doing more? But what could I do? I wasn't a doctor. All I could do was try not to freak out and wait for help to get there. Louisa wasn't moving, and the blood was still dripping down her face, staining the floor. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Finally, the paramedics showed up. They pushed their way through the crowd and immediately started assessing the situation. I felt some relief, but it didn't last long. They worked quickly, putting her on a stretcher and rushing her out of the cafe. I don't think I even remembered to grab my jacket or my bag. I just stood there, feeling like I was in some weird nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. The cafe owner came over to me, his face worried, and said he'd handle everything with the police and any insurance stuff. I barely heard him. I was too freaked out, still trying to process what had just happened. All I could think about was how she'd come to the state full of energy, looking cute and happy, and now she was in an ambulance, possibly hurt way worse than I'd even realized. I tried to call Louise's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I figured she was probably unconscious or just not in a position to pick it up. The only thing I knew was that I needed to check on her, see if she was okay. A couple of hours later, I finally got a call from the hospital. They told me that Louisa had been treated for a head injury and a mild concussion, but she was going to be okay. Relief washed over me, but I still felt this weird guilt. Was it my fault? Should I have done something differently? Why did I feel like everything that could go wrong had? I texted her later that night just to see how she was doing. No response. I thought, okay, maybe she was too out of it or just didn't want to talk. The next day I tried again. Still nothing. That's when things got even weirder. A few days passed, and I hadn't heard anything from her. I figured she might just need space after such a crazy experience. I sent a few more messages, but nothing. It was like she had disappeared off the face of the earth. Then I started getting some strange messages from people I didn't know asking if I was okay. Some were friends of Louisa, others were just random people. They kept asking about what happened, and then one of them mentioned something about me putting Louisa in a dangerous situation and what kind of guy would make someone go through that. I was stunned. What the hell was going on? I had no idea who these people were or what they were talking about. I had barely even spoken to Louisa before the accident. And now, I was getting all these weird messages making it sound like I had done something wrong. Some of them even hinted that I might have somehow caused the accident on purpose. That was when I realized something wasn't adding up. Louisa was the one who slipped and hit her head. She had gotten hurt, and I was the one who had tried to help. But now it felt like I was being accused of something I didn't do, and I had no idea where all this negativity was coming from. I was just trying to go on a date, for crying out loud. I never heard from Louisa again. I don't know what happened to her after she left the hospital, but I did learn something. Meeting people online can turn into a disaster in ways you can't even imagine. What started as a harmless date ended up being the most chaotic, confusing situation I've ever experienced. And honestly, I'm still not sure what to think about it all. I'll never forget the first time I matched with Lenser on Tinder. She was cute, had this soft smile in her pictures, and there was something really easy about her vibe. We hit it off pretty quickly, and after a few days of chatting, we agreed to meet up. Honestly, at that point, I didn't expect anything weird. It was just a date. But looking back, that was when everything started to go south. I just didn't know it yet. She seemed pretty normal, or at least as normal as you can get meeting someone on Tinder. She was one of those girls who loved to talk about books, music, and how she wanted to travel the world one day. You know, the usual stuff. She even talked about being really into spirituality, like tarot cards, astrology, and stuff like that. It was all chill, but something about her made me want to know more. A couple weeks into chatting, she dropped something that made me raise an eyebrow. She casually mentioned that she was a virgin. Now, I didn't think much of it at the time. People have all kinds of reasons for where they are in life, and virginity wasn't something I thought to question. She seemed like she was comfortable with the idea, so I didn't press it. But the more we talked, the more I started to get this weird vibe. Our first date was at a cozy cafe downtown. It was one of those places where you sit outside and people watch, which was nice. I'd been on enough Tinder dates to know that this was a we'll see where it goes situation. I mean, you can't really tell what someone's like based on a few texts. But Linesha was different. She wasn't just flirty, she was intense. I don't mean that in a bad way, but she had this magnetic energy about her. She had no problem making eye contact and holding a conversation that felt deeper than just surface level small talk. As the date went on, I found myself getting more and more intrigued. There was something very alluring about her, and I started to wonder if we had more in common than just the typical date stuff. The whole time, she kept making little comments about being old-fashioned and how she was waiting for the right person. I assumed she meant in a romantic sense, but part of me wondered if she meant it in a bigger, more personal way. The night ended with a kiss on the cheek, but it was clear we both had a connection. I was definitely interested in seeing her again. The second date was even better. We went to a movie, grabbed some drinks after, and she seemed just as into me as I was into her. By then, I was starting to get comfortable with her, and I didn't want to rush things. I was happy to take things slow, especially if she really was as different as she came off. That was when she brought it up again. The whole virginity thing. She told me in this very serious tone that she was waiting for someone special, someone who could really see her for who she was. It seemed like it meant a lot to her, so I didn't question it. To me, it made sense. There's a lot of pressure to be perfect on social media, and some people genuinely want to wait for a meaningful connection before taking that step. A couple more dates passed, and everything seemed great. We had this strange chemistry that I couldn't help but like her more. But one night, after we had been out for drinks and were sitting in the car, she looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something in her eyes. A mix of nervousness and something else, like she was gearing up to tell me something big. She confessed she had been holding back with me, but not in the way I thought. It wasn't about her feelings, but about her past. At first, I didn't know what she meant. She'd had a few past relationships, but who doesn't? Then she dropped a bombshell. Turns out, she wasn't a virgin, not even close. She had lied to me. She'd lied about everything. She had some messed up reasons for telling me that, but the real reason she said she wanted to wait for someone special was because she was embarrassed. She wasn't ashamed of her past, she said. She was ashamed that people might think she wasn't pure enough. My brain was spinning. I felt like I had been lied to, and I didn't know what to think. Why lie about something like that? It wasn't even like she had to prove herself to me. I was cool with whoever. If anything, I respected someone who could own their choices, but this wasn't that. This was something deeper, something I didn't understand. I was quiet for a moment. I couldn't process it, but part of me wanted to believe her. I didn't want to think she was just playing games. But then she said something that made my stomach drop. She told me that she had lied because she didn't want anyone to know how wild she actually was. She painted this picture of herself as someone who had never been with anyone, but in reality, she had been with plenty of people. The whole virgin thing was her way of keeping a safe distance, keeping people at arm's length while pretending to be someone she wasn't. She didn't want to admit that she wasn't this innocent, pure soul. Instead, she built this persona around it, thinking it would make her more attractive, more desirable. The next few days after that conversation were like a whirlwind. I didn't know what to think. On one hand, I could understand wanting to keep some parts of yourself hidden, but on the other hand, I felt betrayed. It wasn't even the fact that she wasn't a virgin. It was the fact that she had lied to me for so long about it. I felt like I didn't even know her anymore. Eventually, I stopped talking to her. The lies, the confusion, the way she had tried to manipulate the situation, it was too much for me. It wasn't even about the deed or anything like that. It was the fact that she couldn't just be honest with me from the start. I guess in the end, I learned that people aren't always who they say they are. And sometimes the biggest lie is the one we tell ourselves. I'm glad I found out early on. Who knows what other secrets she might have been hiding? But it's one of those things that really makes you question how much you can trust people on dating apps. You think you're meeting someone real, but in the end, it's all just a game. I never thought a Tinder date could turn into something so messed up. You hear about all these horror stories of people getting ghosted or worse, but nothing could prepare me for what happened with Austin. It all started out like a normal match, nothing crazy, just a casual conversation. But trust me, it quickly spiraled into something I still can't fully wrap my head around. I met Austin on Tinder during one of those nights when I was just bored and scrolling through my phone. His profile wasn't anything extraordinary. He was good looking enough, seemed down to earth, and we had a couple of things in common. We both liked movies, we both enjoyed going to the gym, and we shared a couple of mutual friends. So we started chatting. At first, it was pretty standard, the typical getting to know each other stuff. But the more we talked, the more I felt like he was different from the usual guys I matched with. There was something magnetic about him. We set up a date a few days later at my place. I wasn't expecting anything too serious, but I figured it could be fun to hang out. Austin seemed laid back, so I invited him over. I lived in a small flat in the city, nothing fancy but cozy enough for me. He didn't seem too picky about it, which was refreshing because some guys can be a little judgmental about living in a small space. When he showed up, he was on time, which honestly is a rarity. He had this casual confidence about him that made me feel at ease. He didn't try to impress me with over-the-top compliments or cheesy lines. He was just normal. We had a few drinks, put on a movie, and started talking about life. Nothing too serious, just getting to know each other. The date felt like one of those nights that could have been the start of something good. But then little things started to seem off. I didn't think much of it at first, but looking back, it was all a bit strange. Like when he asked to use the bathroom, I could have sworn he was in there a little longer than necessary. When he came back, he had this weird, almost too casual smile. I couldn't put my finger on why, but something didn't sit right with me. He just acted like it was no big deal. Later on, I got up to grab us some more drinks from the kitchen, and when I came back, I noticed a few things had shifted on the coffee table. It wasn't anything huge, just little changes. Like my favorite necklace was no longer on the table where I left it, and my phone was slightly turned in a way I didn't remember. It seemed insignificant, but it bugged me. I brushed it off, though. Maybe I was just being paranoid. The night went on. We continued talking, and he stayed for a couple more hours. I didn't think anything of it when he left. He said he had work in the morning, so we had to head out early. I said goodbye, and he kissed me on the cheek. It felt like a nice, normal date, the kind you'd expect from Tinder. But then the weirdness really started. The next day, I went to get my purse out of my closet, and I noticed something strange. A few of my personal items were missing. My favorite pair of earrings, a few $100 that I kept hidden in a drawer, and even some of the makeup I hadn't even opened yet. I stood there in shock, trying to make sense of it. I was positive I hadn't misplaced them. I'd kept everything in its place, and I'd checked the night before. I was starting to panic. Had I left my door unlocked? Did someone break in while I was distracted? I ran through the events of the night in my head over and over, but everything seemed fine. Then it hit me like a ton of bricks. Austin had been there. He had been there the entire night, and I didn't even notice anything suspicious. I didn't want to believe it. But why? We barely knew each other. I kept thinking about it all day. The feeling of violation wouldn't go away. And it was like my mind kept finding more things that didn't add up. I checked my social media later, and it hit me. Austin had posted a story about our date, a cute picture of us on my couch, smiling. But the caption was weird. He was talking about how lucky he was to have met someone so trusting. The way he phrased it felt off, like he was rubbing it in my face that he pulled off whatever it was he'd done. I didn't let him know I was onto him immediately. I needed to know for sure. So I waited a couple of days. I started paying attention to anything else that seemed out of place. My flat was small, and it didn't take long for me to notice more things that were missing. A few more pieces of jewelry, a scarf I loved, even a couple of books. Each item that went missing seemed insignificant, but they added up quickly. I couldn't keep quiet any longer. I confronted him, but he played it cool, acting like everything was fine. He acted like I was overreacting, just imagining things. But there was this smugness in his responses that made me uncomfortable. He kept texting me about how fun the night had been, asking when we could hang out again. I was done. It was clear to me that he was taking advantage of my trust, but he was so smooth about it that I almost started doubting myself. I ended up blocking him on everything, but it didn't stop there. I started digging through old messages from him. I realized that a lot of the things he said were attempts to gain my trust even more. He was deliberately setting things up to make me feel comfortable enough to let my guard down. It was calculated. I started to feel like I'd been played for a fool. It's been a few weeks since that happened, and I still can't believe it. I'm usually pretty good at trusting people, but Austin made me second guess myself. He had no reason to do what he did, but it was like some sick came to him. I never told anyone the full story. I think part of me didn't want to seem foolish, and part of me didn't want to believe it had gone down the way it did. But now looking back, I know I was lucky. He could have taken way more, or worse. I might have not realized it until it was too late. I've deleted Tinder, and I don't trust anyone I meet online anymore. It's not worth it. You never know who's really on the other side of the screen. I had some pretty weird dates in my time, but nothing like this one. Tinder is a funny app. You can meet someone you think you really connect with, only to have the weirdest stuff happen that completely ruins any chance of a relationship. So there was this girl named Shenny. We matched one night, and right away she seemed cool. Not the typical, hey, how's it going? Kind of small talk you usually get on Tinder. We talked about a bunch of random stuff: movies, music, travel, and food. She said she loved cooking, which was kind of a turn on for me. I mean, who doesn't like someone who knows their way around the kitchen? We hit it off pretty quickly and agreed to meet up at her place the following weekend. She wanted to cook me dinner. Now, I'm not picky about food at all, so I was excited. It was a casual date, no big deal, right? I was just expecting a chill evening, maybe a good meal, and some fun conversation. Well, that's not at all how it went down. The night of the date, I showed up at her place a little early, just to make sure I wouldn't be late. She greeted me at the door with a warm smile and invited me in. Her apartment was small but cozy. You could tell she put effort into decorating it. The vibe was I'm an artsy person who loves to cook, and was giving me major good energy. We chatted for a bit while she finished up cooking. She had a glass of wine in her hand, and I could tell she was a little nervous. I tried to reassure her that everything was fine, but there was just this weird, almost tense energy hanging around. As she finished prepping, she told me to take a seat at the dining table and that dinner would be ready soon. I didn't mind the wait. Honestly, I was just happy to be there enjoying her company. As she worked in the kitchen, she seemed to be getting more and more frantic. I thought it was just because she was trying to impress me with her cooking skills, so I didn't think much of it. She kept checking on the food and stirring pots. I just sipped my wine and scrolled through my phone. Then, all of a sudden, I heard this strange sound, kind of like a crackling or popping. It was hard to describe, but it didn't sound right. I stood up and walked toward the kitchen, and that's when I saw it. The stovetop was on fire. Not just a little flame, but full-on flames licking the sides of the oven. At first, I froze. I mean, what do you do in that kind of situation? I've never really been in a kitchen fire before. I wasn't even sure if it was dangerous yet. But then I realized how quickly it was spreading. It wasn't just the stove. It had already started to reach the cabinets above. The whole place was filling with smoke. Shenny was in a full panic, running around trying to figure out what to do. She was screaming, almost in tears, but I wasn't sure if it was because she was embarrassed or scared. She grabbed a dish towel, soaked it in water, and tried to smack at the fire. All that did was make the flames grow even bigger. It felt like time slowed down. I didn't know what to do, so I grabbed the fire extinguisher from under the sink and started spraying it everywhere. It was a complete mess. The fire was finally under control, but it left this thick, burnt smell in the air. The kitchen was covered in foam, and there was black soot all over the counters. The dinner she'd been so excited to make was ruined, completely ruined. I tried to calm her down, telling her it was okay, but I could tell she felt horrible about it. It wasn't even like she just ruined a nice dinner. It felt like she had ruined the whole vibe of the evening. The excitement I'd felt about the date just vanished. She apologized a million times, but there was nothing to apologize for. It was an accident, and honestly, I wasn't even mad. But she kept insisting she'd messed everything up. She even went as far as to say that this was just how her luck went. I felt bad for her, but at the same time, I was starting to wonder how a simple dinner turned into a scene from a disaster movie. We sat down on the couch, both of us covered in fire extinguisher foam, and there was this awkward silence between us. We were both laughing a little, trying to make light of the situation, but it just felt off. I mean, how do you come back from something like that? I had a lot of sympathy for her, but I started wondering if this was some sort of sign. If we couldn't even get through a simple dinner without a mini fire, what did that say about us? To make things worse, she kept talking about how cooking was her thing, and she never had anything like this happen before. She looked so embarrassed, like she couldn't believe this was happening on our first date. I reassured her again that it wasn't a big deal, but there was this weird energy in the room. It was like this massive elephant in the room that we both knew we couldn't ignore. After about an hour of trying to salvage the date, I made the decision to leave. It wasn't because I didn't like her or anything. I genuinely liked her. But the night had just spiraled so far out of control, and I didn't feel comfortable staying any longer. It wasn't the fun, easygoing night I thought it would be, and I didn't want to make it worse for her. I said goodbye, and she walked me out to my car. There was this strange feeling hanging in the air. I didn't know what to say. It wasn't like she was a bad person or anything. It was just a bizarre, awkward night that neither of us were prepared for. We texted a few times afterward, but the energy was completely different. She apologized again, even though I kept telling her there was no need. I could tell she felt embarrassed by the whole situation, but I never felt the same way about her again. That fire, both literal and figurative, burned away whatever potential connection we had. I don't know if she was embarrassed or just didn't know how to bounce back from it, but we never spoke again after that night. I can laugh about it now, but honestly, I've never gone on another Tinder date with someone who said they loved cooking. That fire didn't just ruin the food, it ruined any chance of me trusting someone's cooking skills on the first date. I learned something that night. Sometimes things just spiral, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. It wasn't the worst date I had been on, but it was definitely the most chaotic one. And I don't think I'll ever forget the smell of burnt food mixed with fire extinguisher foam. It's funny how you can meet someone on Tinder, and everything seems normal at first. I thought I was just going on a casual date. Nothing crazy, just grabbing coffee with a guy named Daniel who seemed cool enough. But looking back now, I wish I had never matched with him. When we first started talking, everything seemed pretty typical. We had some small talk about our interests, a few casual jokes here and there. He seemed like one of those easygoing guys, not too forward, not too shy. He had a good sense of humor, which I liked. I wasn't expecting fireworks or anything, just the kind of date where you see if there's a connection. If it doesn't work out, no big deal, right? We met at this little cafe that I liked, one of those cozy places with dim lighting and a chill atmosphere. He showed up on time, wearing a t-shirt and jeans, which was just fine. We sat down, grabbed our drinks, and started chatting. At first, everything was normal. We talked about movies, music, the usual stuff. I honestly didn't think much of him at first, but he seemed polite enough. As the conversation went on, I started to notice little things about him that seemed slightly off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. He was a little too eager to ask personal questions. Not just the normal stuff, like what I do for work or where I grew up. It was more like he was asking about my family dynamics, my childhood, my deepest fears. Things that I thought were a bit too much for a first date. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe he was just a curious guy. But the longer we talked, the more uncomfortable I started to feel. He asked if I had any siblings, and when I told him I had a brother, he immediately started asking about our relationship, how close we were, if we spent a lot of time together. It wasn't normal for a guy I had just met to be dating so deep into my personal life. I could feel myself getting a little tense, but I didn't want to come off as rude or paranoid. After about an hour, I started to feel like maybe I wasn't vibing with him the way I thought I was, so I decided to wrap things up. We finished our drinks and I said I had to go. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a polite way of ending the date. But that's when things started to get weird. A few hours after the date, I had a message from Daniel. He was telling me that he had a really good time and that he'd love to see me again. I was still processing the date, so I didn't know how to feel about it. Part of me was like, okay, maybe he's just being nice. But another part of me felt that weird tension still hanging in the air. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't interested in going on another date, but I didn't want to be rude either. So I waited a few hours before I sent a casual reply saying something like, "Thanks for the date, but I don't think we're a match. Best of luck." It was polite enough, but I didn't expect him to react the way he did. The next day, Daniel messaged me again. This time, the tone was different. It was more persistent. He asked me if I was sure about not wanting to see him again, and if I just gave him one more chance, I would change my mind. It was weird, but I figured maybe he was just a little disappointed. People get attached quickly sometimes, right? I didn't think much of it. But then things started to get really strange. Over the next couple of days, I kept getting messages from him. They weren't like the normal, "Hey, how are you?" type of texts. No, these were messages that felt a little too personal. He started bringing up things I hadn't told him on the date, like where I worked, what my favorite places were to visit, even some of my favorite books. It was like he had done some kind of digging. I hadn't told him about any of this, so the only way he could have known was if he'd gone through my social media accounts. At first, I thought maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe he was just being friendly, a little too curious. But then it started happening more and more. Every time I posted something on Instagram or Facebook, I would get a message from him almost immediately. It wasn't just a "hey, I saw your post" kind of message. He would comment on the places I went, ask how I felt about the things I was doing. It felt like he was tracking me. I tried to ignore it, but it only got worse. He started showing up at places I went. I'd see him at the same coffee shop, at the same bookstore, and even at the same park. I know people have their routines, but this felt too much. One day, I was sitting in a coffee shop working on some stuff for my job, and I looked up to see him standing in line. My heart dropped. I could feel my body tense up immediately. I didn't want to make it obvious, so I tried to act casual, like I didn't notice him. But it was hard to ignore the fact that he was watching me. He didn't approach me, but I could feel his eyes on me the whole time. I paid for my coffee and quickly left, trying not to make it obvious that I was freaking out. That night, I went home and locked all my doors and windows. It sounds paranoid, but I didn't feel safe anymore. I didn't want to block him outright because I didn't want to escalate things, but I was getting really uneasy. Then it happened. I was out with some friends one night just trying to have a normal evening. I got a text from Daniel. He said he'd seen me at the bar and that he thought we could talk things out. He even mentioned that he knew I was with friends, and it made me sick to think how closely he had been watching me. I looked around the bar, scanning the crowd, but I didn't see him. My stomach twisted. I had to leave. I didn't know what to do at that point. I blocked and reported him and tried to forget about it. But for the next few weeks, I kept seeing him everywhere. It was like he was following me, like he was always just a step behind. I felt trapped in my own life, like he was always lurking around the corner, watching my every move. Eventually, it stopped. I don't know what happened to Daniel, or if he even realized how messed up his behavior was. But I do know that I'll never forget how terrifying it felt to be stalked by someone I barely knew. Tinder isn't always as harmless as it seems. You think you're meeting a nice person, but sometimes you're just meeting a stranger who doesn't know where boundaries are. And in the end, I learned that being cautious is never a bad thing. I still use dating apps, but I always keep a better eye out for red flags now. I don't take anything for granted. And I never let my guard down again. I still can't get over what happened with Donna. It's one of those things that hits you out of nowhere. And even now, it doesn't make sense to me. I'm not one to get emotionally attached too quickly, but the situation was, well, it was different. It all started on a normal Wednesday evening. I was swiping through Tinder and not expecting much. Then I matched with Donna. Her profile was simple, just a few pictures of her hanging out with friends and traveling. But she had this smile that stood out. I don't know what it was, but I found myself wanting to talk to her more. At first, the conversations were typical, getting to know each other, small talk, the usual. I'm not gonna lie, I was feeling the vibe. She was funny, easy to talk to, and we had a lot in common. We both liked the same kinds of movies, music, and even shared some similar hobbies. It didn't take long before we decided to meet up in person. We agreed to grab coffee at this cute cafe near her place. The first date was honestly perfect. She was just as cool in person, and we hit it off immediately. We laughed, talked about random stuff, and time flew by. After the date, she texted me that she had a great time and wanted to see me again. I felt the same way. We continued texting the next few days, and things seemed to be going smoothly. But that's when things took a turn. After our second date, everything changed. She started being a little distant, not responding to my messages quickly. And when we did talk, it felt like something was off. I tried not to read into it too much, thinking maybe she was busy or had other things going on. But after a week of the same behavior, I started to get frustrated. I was genuinely into her, and I thought things were going well, so I didn't understand why she was pulling away. Then, out of nowhere, she texted me one evening. It was a short message. "Hey, I think we should stop seeing each other. I'm not feeling it anymore." I was stunned. I didn't know how to react. One minute, everything seemed fine, and the next, she was telling me she didn't want to see me anymore. I tried to stay calm, but I was confused. We hadn't even had any big arguments or disagreements. It just didn't make sense. I didn't try to push her for an explanation. I respected her decision, even though it stung. I deleted her number and moved on. It sucked, but that's dating, right? You meet people. Sometimes things click, sometimes they don't. I tried to put it behind me. But the very next day, I saw something that completely threw me off. I was scrolling through Instagram, just mindlessly flipping through my feed, when I saw a post that made me stop dead in my tracks. It was Donna, and she was getting married. I couldn't believe it. I stared at the picture for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't just a casual wedding post either. It was a whole professional-looking shot of her, in a white dress, standing next to some guy I didn't recognize. She was holding his hand, smiling like she had the best day of her life. It wasn't a small ceremony either. There were hundreds of comments from friends and family congratulating her. It hit me hard. How could she have broken up with me the day before, telling me she wasn't feeling it anymore, and then the next day she's getting married? I felt like I had been slapped in the face. It wasn't just the fact that she got married. It was the fact that she had been lying to me this whole time. What was the point of even meeting up with me and pretending like everything was normal, only to drop a bomb like this? I didn't know what to do. I was angry, confused, and honestly a little embarrassed. I was thinking about how I had opened up to her, how we had talked about our future plans, and how she had made it seem like we had something real. But now it felt like I had been some sort of placeholder for whatever she was really planning. The whole thing felt like I had been used, but for what? Just to make sure she had some guy to date before our actual wedding. I stared at that Instagram post for a while, my mind racing. I thought about texting her, calling her out on everything. But what would I even say? How do you even confront someone about something like this? In the end, I just couldn't bring myself to do it. It felt too strange, too pointless. Instead, I unfollowed her and blocked her account. I didn't want to see anything more of her perfect life. For the next few days, I tried to move on. I couldn't stop thinking about it, though. I told a couple of friends what happened, but they didn't really know what to say either. Some of them thought it was strange, but others just said, "Well, you dodged a bullet." I didn't feel like I dodged anything, though. I felt like I'd been blindsided. A couple of weeks later, I found out that the guy she married was someone she had been dating before me. Apparently, they had broken up for a while. I guess she had been talking to me just as a distraction. It still didn't make sense, but it was kind of comforting to know that it wasn't about me personally. She had just been using me as a stepping stone for whatever she needed. But the whole thing left a bitter taste in my mouth. I still think about it sometimes. It wasn't just the fact that I got dumped out of nowhere, or that I found out she was getting married the next day. It was the way she had treated me like nothing more than a temporary placeholder. The lies, the manipulation, all of it. I'm over it now, I guess. I moved on, started seeing other people, and tried not to dwell in the past. But every time I hear someone talk about a sudden breakup, I can't help but remember Donna and how everything with her turned into a complete mind game. Tinder might be full of weird encounters, but that one was by far the strangest and most messed up thing that's ever happened to me. I wasn't really looking for anything serious when I swiped right on a Sheldon. I had been using Tinder for a while, mostly just to pass the time. I wasn't expecting to meet the love of my life. I figured I'd meet some cool people, maybe grab a drink here and there, and see where things went. Sheldon, though, he seemed different from the others. His profile was well put together. Pictures of him at the beach, a few shots of him hanging out with friends, and the occasional picture with his dog. Nothing too crazy, just your typical guy next door vibe. So I matched with him. At first, everything felt pretty normal. We had a couple of nice chats about music life and random stuff. Nothing weird, no red flags. I thought, okay, this could be a decent connection. He was polite, easy to talk to, and seemed like he had his life together. I felt comfortable enough to agree to meet up. He suggested a casual coffee date, which I thought was a good sign. No pressure, just getting to know each other. The day of the date, I showed up at the cafe early, not wanting to be late. I've always been someone who values punctuality, so when he texted to say he was running 5 minutes behind, I figured no big deal. When he finally walked in, I was surprised at how good looking he was in person, when more than his pictures showed. He had this confident, almost cocky smile that gave me an impression of someone who knew how to handle themselves. I liked that. But the first little red flag came early. We ordered our drinks, and as we sat down, Sheldon immediately started talking about how many women he dated. It wasn't bragging, but more like he was trying to make himself seem impressive. I didn't mind too much at first, but something felt off. Every time I mentioned something about myself, he quickly turned the conversation back to himself. And then he started asking really personal questions. Not the casual, what do you do for fun kind of questions, but more like, have you ever been in love? And what's the worst thing you've ever done in a relationship? It was a little intense for a first date, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe he was just nervous. The date was a mix of casual conversation and moments where I could tell he was trying to take control of the situation. He'd get close, his tone would shift, and he'd make little remarks that seemed almost condescending. I figured I was overthinking it, so I tried to brush it off. But as the night went on, it got worse. I don't know when the switch flipped, but somewhere between the second cup of coffee and the third, Sheldon's demeanor changed. At first, it was subtle. He started making passive-aggressive comments. Things like how women always overreact or how he didn't trust people who didn't like sports. It felt like he was testing the waters, seeing what he could get away with. But then it escalated. He started getting irritated when I would laugh at something he said, telling me I was being too sensitive. It wasn't much, but enough to make me feel like I wasn't in control of the conversation anymore. Eventually, we wrapped up the date. I wasn't sure how I felt about it. Part of me thought maybe I was reading into things, and another part of me felt a bit uncomfortable. I gave him the benefit of the doubt and agreed to see him again. But as soon as I agreed to another date, things took a turn I couldn't ignore. The next day, Sheldon started texting me constantly. At first, it was normal stuff, just checking in and asking how my day was going. But after a couple of days, I started noticing a pattern. He would send multiple texts in a row, each one more demanding than the last. One message would be fine, but then another one would come in quickly, as if he were expecting an immediate response. He'd get frustrated if I didn't reply right away. It felt controlling, but I brushed it off as him just being excited. Then things started happening that made me feel more and more uneasy. I got a text from him one night late, saying he had a surprise for me. I didn't think much of it, but when I agreed to meet him, I showed up to find him standing there with a look on his face that I couldn't read. He handed me a small gift. It seemed sweet at first, but then I realized it was a necklace. A simple one, nothing special. But here's the thing. It was the exact same necklace my ex had bought me. I told Sheldon this, thinking it was a weird coincidence, but instead of apologizing, he laughed and said it didn't matter, it was just a gesture. Over the next few weeks, Sheldon started being a lot more possessive. He'd ask where I was going and who I was with, even if it was something as simple as going out with friends. If I didn't reply quickly, I'd get a text asking why I wasn't answering him. Then, when we did meet up, he'd talk down to me, make little remarks about how I dressed or how I acted. It wasn't outright mean, but it was definitely controlling. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, trying not to say the wrong thing. Then one night, things really took a turn. We were hanging out at his place, just watching TV. Everything seemed fine at first, but then he started getting really angry. I don't remember exactly what triggered it, but he snapped. He started yelling at me for not responding to his texts fast enough, accusing me of not caring about him. I tried to calm him down, but the more I tried to talk, the angrier he got. His voice got louder, and I could see his face getting redder. I was scared, but I didn't know what to do. I never thought he would act like this. He had always seemed so cool and collected, but now he was a completely different person. That night, I left his place feeling shaken, and I didn't want to see him again. I ended things over text, telling him I didn't think we were a good match. But that's when things really got bad. He started texting me nonstop, calling me names, and accusing me of leading him on. It was like I'd set up a bomb in his mind. The anger he had towards me grew and it terrified me. I had to block him from everything, but even then, he would find ways to contact me, sending random messages from different numbers. I felt trapped. I should have trusted my guts sooner, but I never thought it would escalate that way. Sheldon was charming at first, but I soon realized he wasn't who he seemed. He was controlling, manipulative, and abusive. I still feel a little uneasy whenever I think about it. It's scary to think about how easily someone can hide their true colors until they've already gotten under your skin. This one time I matched with a girl named Hester on Tinder, and it was honestly one of the weirdest, most uncomfortable situations I've ever been in. I had no idea what I was walking into, but man, I definitely should have trusted my gut and swiped left the moment I had doubts. But yeah, here's the story. Buckle up. I'm not even sure why I swiped right on her. She had that vibe, the kind that could go either way. Her pictures were cute, sure, but there was something about her profile that just felt a little too carefree. I don't know if it was the way she talked about her interests or just how vague everything seemed, but I had an instinctual feeling something wasn't quite right. Still, I figured whatever, it's just a swipe. So we match. Cool. I send a message and it starts out like every other Tinder conversation. A bit awkward, a little small talk. She seemed nice enough at first, but as we got talking more, I started picking up on some things. Little comments here and there that didn't quite add up. Like how she would talk about her plans, but never really explain them, and how she was always busy but never said exactly what she was doing. Eventually, I asked her straight up what she liked to do for fun, and she responded with something along the lines of, "I'm just keeping my options open right now." I didn't think much of it at first, but then she said something else that made me pause. She mentioned she was talking to 2 other guys and how she didn't want to rush into anything yet. It was said casually, almost like she was making a joke, but it made my stomach drop for some reason. I didn't quite understand what she meant by keeping my options open, but I figured, okay, maybe she's just being honest. Some people are like that. Still, the whole situation was already making me feel weird. But then she kept pushing it, saying she wasn't looking for anything too serious and was just kind of seeing where things go with everyone she was talking to. I didn't want to come off as judgmental or uptight, so I tried to roll with it. Maybe this was just her vibe, and who was I to judge? It's a dating app, right? People can do whatever they want. We kept texting back and forth, but it was getting more and more obvious that something wasn't right. She would cancel plans last minute, goes for hours, and then come back like nothing happened. I mean, I get it. Life happens, but it just felt like she wasn't really that interested in me. It was all so off. Finally, after a few weeks of this back and forth nonsense, I suggested we hang out in person. I figured maybe meeting up would clear things up. If we hit it off, great. If not, I'd at least know where I stood. So we decided to meet at this cute little coffee shop downtown. I get there first, grab a table by the window, and wait for her. When she walked in, I have to admit, I was a little taken aback. She looked just like her pictures, but there was something off in the way she moved. Like she was distracted, like she wasn't fully present. But whatever. She smiled, sat down across from me, and we started talking. The conversation was fine, I guess. Not amazing, not terrible. But it was clear to me that she wasn't really paying that much attention to what I was saying. As we talked, her phone kept buzzing. She would glance down at it, answer a message, then go back to our conversation. Honestly, it felt like she wasn't fully there with me, but again, I tried to brush it off. Maybe she was just busy. She then casually mentioned how she had dinner plans later that night with someone else, one of the other guys she'd been seeing. That was when I started to feel a little uncomfortable. Here's the thing. I'm not the type of guy who gets jealous or territorial, but hearing her talk so casually about dating 2 other people while sitting across from me was just awkward. It didn't sit right with me, like at all. And I think she could sense my discomfort. But what really threw me off was when she leaned in, grinning like she was about to share some big secret. She told me she was only talking to me because one of the other guys hadn't been as exciting lately. She described him as too boring for her tastes and mentioned that she was just having fun seeing where things went with me. But then she almost immediately mentioned that the other guy was planning a big day for her and that it was a super fun, spontaneous thing. She kept comparing me to him, which made me feel like I was just the backup option, the side dish. It was the weirdest feeling ever. I mean, imagine sitting there with someone you're supposed to be getting to know, and they're basically telling you that they're talking to 2 other people, and that you're just one of their options. I felt like a placeholder, like a second choice. I tried to keep it cool, but the whole vibe had shifted. I wasn't mad, just off. The whole situation felt like it was more about her trying to figure out who would give her the most attention. After some awkward silences and me trying to keep the conversation going, I excused myself and went to the bathroom. I stood there in front of the mirror for a while, just thinking about what I'd gotten myself into. When I came back, Hester was still there, texting away, not even looking up when I sat down. I wasn't going to sit through any more of that, so I finished my coffee, stood up, and said I had to go. She didn't seem surprised, barely even looked up from her phone when I left. Walking back to my car, I had just been a pawn in some weird dating game. I don't know why she felt the need to tell me all that, but it was clear to me that she wasn't looking for anything real. She wasn't interested in getting to know me. She was just using people to pass the time and fill the gaps. It was honestly kind of messed up. I blocked her number later that night, and looking back on it, I realized that sometimes honesty isn't always as great as people make it out to be. Hester didn't care about me or anyone else. She just wanted to have her cake and eat it too, and I wasn't going to be a part of that. So this Tinder date still sticks with me, and I don't think I'll ever fully forget how weird it was. You know how people always talk about having bad Tinder dates, but you always think it won't happen to you. Well, that was me. But then this guy named Cameron came along, and everything just got really, really awkward. It started pretty normal, like any other match. I swiped right because he seemed cool. He was into sports, especially football, and I thought that was fun. I'm not super into football, but I don't mind watching a game now and then. Plus, he seemed like the type of guy who was outgoing and confident. You know the type, someone who's always the life of the party. We had some good back and forth messages, and he suggested we meet up. He said, "Why not come with me to a game this weekend? We could hang out and watch the match." I wasn't really that excited about the game part, but I figured it could be fun to get out of my routine, so I said sure. Now looking back, I realize how wrong that decision was. But whatever, you live and learn. So the day of the game arrives. I get dressed, not anything too fancy, but I do want to look decent. I'm thinking this could be a cool way to see how he is in person, have some fun, and maybe get to know each other better. We meet at the stadium entrance, and Cameron seems like he's in a good mood, super hyped for the game. We get our tickets, and he's talking about how much he loves his team, how excited he is, all that stuff. And I'm just kind of nodding along, not entirely sure how to keep the conversation going since, well, football's not my thing. But here's where it all started to go downhill. When we get inside, he leads me to our seats, and then he says, "I'm gotta go meet up with some of my friends, but I'll catch up with you later." I thought it was weird, but maybe it was one of those things where he just wanted to hang out with his friends for a bit and then check in with me. So I sit there by myself, surrounded by a bunch of strangers. I'm trying to make the best of it, watching the game, scrolling through my phone, checking social media, just trying not to live like a total loner. The game kicks off, and I'm doing my best to follow along, but I don't really know what's going on. I'm more focused on the people around me than the actual match. I look around for Cameron a couple of times, but I don't see him. Maybe he's just really into the game or whatever, I think. But then I see him. He's sitting in the stands with a bunch of his buddies, laughing, drinking, just having the time of his life. And I'm sitting by myself trying not to feel like a total idiot. Time goes by, and it feels like hours. The first half of the game ends, and I'm still sitting there doing nothing. I'm texting my friends, trying to make small talk with them, but it's just getting awkward. I keep looking around for Cameron, but he's nowhere to be found. It's like I'm invisible to him. During halftime, I decide to grab a snack or something, hoping to at least make myself feel like I'm doing something other than being ignored. I wander around the concession stands, grab some overpriced nachos, and just take a moment to breathe. Honestly, I'm kind of frustrated at this point. I didn't sign up for this. I was expecting a casual, fun date where we could chat and get to know each other better, not a solo mission at a football game. As I'm walking back to my seat, I finally spot Cameron. He's still hanging out with his friends, not even acknowledging that I've been sitting alone for the last couple of hours. I walk up to him, feeling pretty frustrated by now, and I just stand there waiting for him to notice me. He turns to me, all casual, and says, "Well, hey, you good?" I wanted to say something snarky like, "Yeah, I'm fine. Just spent the last hour by myself while you've been partying with your friends," but I just smiled and nodded. I didn't want to make a scene or start some awkward confrontation. So I just sit down, and he was right back to talking to his friends. No effort to include me, no apology for ditching me for so long. It was like it was just a side note in his day. The second half of the game goes by just as badly. I sit there bored out of my mind watching Cameron and his friends talk, laugh, and yell at the players. At one point, I get up to go to the bathroom, and when I come back, he's still hanging out with his friends, not even glancing in my direction. It's like I'm completely invisible. So I just sit there, feeling like a total idiot. When the game finally ends, Cameron stands up and says, "All right, that was fun, let's go." He's still not looking at me, still not acknowledging the fact that he pretty much ignored me the whole time. I can feel my frustration building up, but I keep my cool. We walk out of the stadium, and he finally looks at me and says, "You all right? You don't look too happy." At that point, I just lost it. I told him I wasn't feeling great, that I didn't appreciate being left alone the whole time, and that I thought we were supposed to be having a good time together. And he just shrugged like it didn't matter. He was more focused on talking to his friends than on actually connecting with me. The whole walk back to the car was awkward. I couldn't believe how little he cared. I decided then and there that I wasn't going to see him again. The whole thing was just a massive waste of time. He never even apologized or explained why he acted that way. He just went on with his day like nothing was wrong. That was the last time I ever talked to Cameron. I deleted his number, unfollowed him on social media, and just moved on. But honestly, that whole experience left a bad taste in my mouth. It's like he thought I was just some accessory to his day, not a person he was supposed to be getting to know. It's wild how someone can treat you like that, especially when it's supposed to be a fun date. It made me realize that sometimes people aren't as great as they seem on the surface. I honestly didn't see it coming. I thought we were just casually chatting. Tinder, dating apps, whatever. You don't always expect things to get weird. But this time, it definitely got weird, and I still can't believe I didn't catch on sooner. It all started like any other match. I was scrolling through Tinder, kind of bored, not really expecting much. But then I saw her, Senna. Her profile was pretty standard, but there was something about her pictures that stood out. She looked like she had it all together. Beautiful, stylish, always had that perfect life vibe. I swiped right, and within minutes, we matched. I wasn't really looking for anything serious, just maybe someone to chat with and see where it went. It felt like a typical Tinder thing. At first, things were pretty chill. We were texting back and forth, talking about life, our favorite shows, and random stuff. She was funny, easy to talk to, and I honestly didn't think much of it. I remember she told me she was into makeup, which wasn't surprising given her flawless selfies. She even mentioned that she worked as a freelance makeup artist. I thought it was cool, and I just assumed she was passionate about it. But then one day things took a weird turn. She casually dropped a hint about how she was running low on some of her favorite makeup products, and I, being the nice guy I am, offered to send her a little something to help out. I didn't think it was that big of a deal at the time. She thanked me, and I assumed that was the end of it. The next day, Santa texted me again. This time, it was about makeup again. She mentioned how much she loved a certain brand and how the products were super expensive. Again, I didn't think too much of it. I told her I'd look into it, maybe get her a few things, just to be nice. I figured I could maybe send her a small gift. What's the harm, right? That's when things really started to spiral. Santa started sending me links to all these different makeup products. Foundations, lipsticks, highlighters, you name it. I was kind of confused but didn't want to be rude, so I just went along with it. I thought maybe she just wanted some new products for her job, or maybe she was trying to help me understand what she liked. But then it got more serious. Every time I got something for her, she'd send me more stuff she needed. The list started getting longer, and the price tags kept rising. At first, it was just small things. $50 here, $100 there. But soon, I was dropping hundreds of dollars, and she knew how to make me feel like I had to do it. Santa was so good at making me feel like it was all okay. She'd say things like, "I've had a rough week. This would really help me get through it," or, "It's a really good deal right now. You should grab it for me while it's on sale." At first, I didn't even question it. She seemed so sweet, so convincing. It was like a weird little game, me buying these products, and she was always so thankful. I was starting to feel like I was doing something nice helping her out. But when I took a step back, I realized how much money I was actually spending. By the end of the first month, I'd spent close to $500 on makeup for her. I wasn't even sure why I kept doing it, but I guess I was just sucked into the whole thing. I tried to stop, but she would always come up with some excuse, some reason why she needed something else. She'd be sweet, flirtatious, and even a little apologetic, and I just couldn't say no. It started to mess with my head. I think, it's just makeup. What's the harm? But then the doubt started creeping in. Why was she asking me for so much stuff? Why was I doing it when we hadn't even met in person yet? I started wondering if she actually liked me or if this was just some game to her. I decided to take a break from texting her for a few days. It wasn't anything dramatic, just me needing some space to think. But of course, when I didn't reply, she would start texting me constantly. At first, it was simple like, hey, I miss talking to you, and I hope everything's okay. But then it turned into more pressure. She'd send me multiple messages in a row, almost like she was trying to guilt trip me into responding or buying her something else. The text started feeling less like friendly conversation and more like demands. One day, I asked her how much more makeup she needed. I mean, how could she possibly go through so many products in such a short amount of time? That's when things really took a turn. She got defensive. I didn't even think I'd asked anything too out of line, but she made it seem like I was questioning her career, her passion. And that's when the manipulation really kicked in. She told me that makeup was her livelihood, that without it, she wouldn't be able to do what she loved. And then came the "I'm really disappointed in you" line, as if I had let her down somehow. That's when I realized I'd been caught up in something much bigger than I'd ever expected. It wasn't just about buying makeup anymore, it was about control. I didn't know what to do. I was overwhelmed, confused, and honestly a little scared. How had I let this happen? She was slowly taking advantage of my kindness, and I didn't even see it. I had to take a step back and really think about everything. In the end, I cut things off. I stopped replying, blocked her on everything. But the weird thing is, she never gave up. She would still message me from different numbers, trying to guilt me into coming back. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how messed up it all was. She had completely used me, and I couldn't believe I had fallen for it. I still wonder how many other people she's done this to. The whole thing was messed up, and I should have seen the signs way earlier. Looking back, it feels like I was in a weird trance, thinking I was being nice when in reality I was being taken advantage of. I just hope I learned my lesson, and I definitely won't be falling for that kind of manipulation again. This is a story I never thought I'd have to share, but it still messes with me even now. It all started with a simple swipe on Tinder. You know, the usual. I wasn't expecting anything major, just maybe a few fun conversations. But then I matched with Ashley. She had this cute smile, a pretty decent bio, and seemed super chill. She was into hiking, art, and cooking, which didn't seem like anything out of the ordinary. Honestly, I thought she was pretty cool, and we started chatting immediately. Nothing felt off. We swapped some memes, joked about the stupid stuff we'd both seen on the internet, and even started talking about meeting up. But then she casually mentioned that she had a twin. At first, I didn't think much of it. Twins, right? There's always that twin dynamic that's kind of funny, like the whole which one is which thing. I didn't really know what to expect from that, but hey, it was cool, I guess. Fast forward a few days later, we set up a date. I was a little nervous because, yeah, meeting someone off Tinder is always a bit of a gamble. We decided to meet at this cute little cafe near the park. She said she would bring her twin just so they could hang out too. Honestly, I didn't really think it was a big deal. Twins hang out together, right? So I show up at the cafe and I see her walking towards me, but something felt weird. She looked exactly like her pictures, but there was something about her that made me question if she was the same person I'd been chatting with. I thought maybe she just wasn't as chatty in person, but something seemed off. I brushed it off though. Maybe she was nervous or something. We got a table, and her twin was with her. At first, I didn't think much of it. Twins are usually super close, and I figured she was just trying to make sure everything was comfortable for me. So we're talking, and it's going well, mostly. Her twin seemed pretty cool too, so I just rolled with it. I thought maybe I was just overthinking it. But then, out of nowhere, Ashley kissed me. And I'm talking like a full-on kiss right on the lips. I'm frozen, not really sure how to react, because it was totally out of nowhere. I didn't think it was a huge deal at first, but I could feel her twin's eyes burning into me. It was super awkward, but I figured maybe it was just her way of breaking the ice or whatever. Then, things got weird. After the kiss, Ashley pulled away with a strange smile on her face. She looked at her twin, and her twin was angry. I didn't understand what was happening. Her twin gave me this look, like she was about to explode, and that's when I realized something. This wasn't the Ashley I've been talking to on Tinder. No, the girl I kissed was her twin. The real Ashley was sitting across from me, watching the entire thing happen. Now I'm sitting there trying to piece together what the hell just happened. I didn't know what to say. I thought I had kissed the girl I'd matched with, but clearly I'd kissed the wrong twin. The real Ashley wasn't happy about it at all. She started yelling at me in the middle of the cafe, causing a huge scene. It was like something straight out of a soap opera. Her twin was laughing like it was the funniest thing she'd ever seen, but I didn't find it funny at all. I kept apologizing, trying to explain that I honestly didn't know, but it was like Ashley wasn't listening. Her face turned bright red, and she kept going on and on about how I kissed the wrong girl. I felt embarrassed, confused, and honestly kind of pissed off. I didn't even want to be in this situation, but now I'm being made to look like some kind of idiot. To make matters worse, she started saying things like, "You're so stupid. How could you not tell the difference? Do we really look alike?" I didn't know what to do. I was sitting there stuck in this awkward situation that I never signed up for. Her twin wasn't helping. She was just sitting there, not caring about the scene Ashley was making. I was trying to tell Ashley that I genuinely didn't know they were twins, but she wasn't having any of it. Then it took an even stranger turn. Ashley started accusing me of being some kind of player or a liar, which didn't make sense at all. I wasn't even sure how I was supposed to fix this situation. I tried to walk it back, saying I thought she was the one I had matched with, but she just wouldn't let it go. She was now calling me rude, disrespectful, and saying I wasn't worth her time. At this point, everyone in the cafe was staring at us, and I just wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. The worst part, Ashley's twin didn't even seem upset about it. She just sat there, almost smug, watching her sister get more and more furious. It was like she had planned this whole thing like some twisted game. I was so embarrassed that I didn't even want to look at either of them anymore. I could feel my face burning with humiliation. After what felt like an eternity, Ashley stormed out, leaving her twin and me sitting there in awkward silence. I wanted to just get up and leave, but I felt like I had to apologize to the twin, even though it wasn't really my fault. She didn't say anything. She just gave me a weird look and walked out too. I was left sitting there, wondering what just happened. I walked out of that cafe in a daze, feeling totally disoriented. I didn't even know what to think. Did I do something wrong? Was this all just a huge misunderstanding, or did I get played in some weird twin trap? I never heard from Ashley again. She blocked me on everything. The twin, I never saw her again either. It's still one of the weirdest and most uncomfortable things I've ever had to go through. I never expected my Tinder date to turn into some chaotic, embarrassing mess involving two people who were practically the same. But hey, what else do you expect when it comes to dating apps, right?